What can Israel do at this point? Are they even able to stop?
They could stop, but the damage has already been done. I mean, Israel is the most hated country in the world, and that's not going to disappear anytime soon. That's something that's going to last decades. That permanent damage has been done to them. The thing is, with the current government, it's not possible for them to stop. The only way that Netanyahu can retain power is by satisfying his, the extremist element within his coalition. And they will not let him stop, even if he wanted to. And I'm not sure at all that he wants to. But even if he wanted to stop, he just cannot. They're not going to let him. They'll pull the plug on his government the instant he tries that. And so he is tied to this war, tied to he's actually drawn up plans for the occupation of Gaza City, where, 1.2 million, that's the majority of the residents of Gaza are living right now. And, it used to be a city, it was the largest city in Gaza, but it had a population of 700,000. But now there are 500,000 refugees within an already very crowded city. Now he's going to take it. I think they've called up 100,000 reservists. And the IDF is very reluctant. They said this is going to be a mess. But he essentially, again, I think it's two things. I mean, there's his own political survival, but it's clear it's more than that. I think just very recently, he described himself as being on a spiritual mission for a greater Israel. This is, something that he said directly. And I think that's true. I mean, it's just like he sees it's not just a matter of his own survival, or for him, maybe the two things have become one in his mind: his own survival and the creation of greater Israel. And in the end, I don't think he feels that he can walk away from Gaza without at least taking a big chunk of it. And that's probably what part of this operation is all about. He just wants to push all the Gazans into a very small area in southern Gaza and just simply seize the northern part. Now, right now there's actually open talk, within Israel about resettling northern Gaza. There were settlements in Gaza until 2005, and then there were a total of 8,000 Jewish settlers there, and they withdrew. The settlements continue to expand and grow in the West Bank, but the Israelis at that point decided to give up on settling Gaza. But that dream is has been revived, and I think that's what he wants to accomplish. And he can only accomplish it with this operation. It's going to drive the 1.2 million current residents of Gaza City south into an area that's only 25% of the original territory of Gaza. So this was prior to the war. This was one of the most densely strips of land in the world. And now you can just imagine how densely packed that's going to be. At the same time that he's talking about this operation, he's also talking about third countries receiving the Gazans, but no country has come forward and agreed to do that. I mean, there's mention has been made of Somaliland or South Sudan or probably other countries as well that don't come to mind right now. But he clearly wants to push, those Gazans that he doesn't kill, he wants to relocate to other countries. And he's going to try to at least carry that out partially, him.
So he's saying he's calling up 100,000 reservists. So how do you see this going? This siege of Gaza with 100,000 Gaza cities? What are they going to do? They're going to just start shooting at anything that moves, and hope they drive them out. How do you see this going?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that 50 to 70% of the buildings in Gaza City have already been severely damaged or destroyed. So much of the city's been destroyed already. Now the orders will be issued for everybody to leave. And then I think the idea is that anybody remains will just be assumed to be Hamas or something. But the fact is, I mean, that a lot of people are not going to move. Again, it's just like they've received these orders again and again. They're told that there's a safe area. They go to the safe area and then it's bombed. And that's happened again and again and again. So I think it's at this point there are certainly going to be a lot of families. We don't know how many, but there are going to be thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands that are just not going to move. So I don't, you know, who knows what's going to happen.
Do you think the IDF will be successful in this operation? 100,000 people is a lot of people, but I mean, we're talking about,
Right.
rubble, destroyed buildings. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a tough
Yeah.
operation, you know?
Right. Even if the other side is, just is very poorly armed in comparison to you, it is. It is. I mean, it's again, it's easier to defend than to attack. The Gazans, the Hamas has had quite a bit of time to prepare for this. They've been in Gaza City for a while, and yeah, they'll put up a fight. It's going to be costly, and that's why the IDF has resisted. Zamir, I guess, is the chief of staff of the IDF, has resisted Netanyahu's pressure so far, but up until recently, I guess he just had to accept. Okay, the prime minister has the authority to order this, so he's going to do it. But he didn't. He clearly doesn't want to. He's argued that this is just going to be very, very costly for the IDF.
Are the Israelis supportive of this idea?
Generally, no. From my understanding, is that the majority of Israelis actually would like to see a ceasefire now and have the hostages brought home. That's, um, but again, it's Netanyahu. I guess the political calculations for Netanyahu, are in the end, his survival doesn't depend on these opinion polls. It's holding together this coalition, and this coalition can only be held together if he remains on the offensive in Gaza.
Well, we've seen that in general, the IDF doesn't do great with ground operations. They didn't get very far into southern Lebanon. And they've been killing a lot of civilians in Gaza, but Hamas is still there, and we see these videos of them doing very heroic acts, like running up to a tank and just setting a bomb on it. They've been doing some damage. So I mean, if he goes in and the Israeli society in general doesn't want to have the IDF in there, and it doesn't go well, it starts to become a real slog, and there become more casualties with the IDF. Will that start to break things for Netanyahu and lead
It
to
could. Right. I mean, the Israeli society in general and the political structures are under a lot of strain right now. Um, and there's sometimes talk of civil war. I don't know that that's really a possibility, but there are there are severe strains. There's a real polarization that's taking place. Not really so much, not really over the issue of Palestinian suffering. Unfortunately, that's something that really seems to matter to only a very small minority of Jewish Israelis. But just over the issues of, let's say, executive power. That Netanyahu has been centralizing power, in the executive office, under his and has been gathering it into his own hands, and has been, putting loyalists in different departments. So, in places like the IDF and other Shin Bet and other agencies that used to be more or less independent. But at the same time, there's quite a bit of resistance and anger about this within Israel. So there is concern for the hostages. I think we're only talking about maybe 25 or 30 live hostages, but that's a constant refrain. And bring the hostage home movement's very strong. And those people seem to understand that the only way to bring them home is actually to make some sort of deal with Hamas. That's when they've gotten hostages back in the past. Is when deals were made, and then with very few exceptions, that's really the only way to get them home. And so there is pressure to do that. And there's a great deal of hatred for Netanyahu, but Netanyahu is a very wily character who's is probably the most successful politician in Israeli history, and he knows how to retain power. And he does have, a strong base of support. I mean, in spite of the anger about the hostages and other things, he's also, um, it seems like when push comes to shove, he finds a way to stay on top. He's made himself valuable to a lot of people and to a lot of different segments of Israeli society.
Yeah, it seems like every week we see more and more horrific photos and videos coming out of Gaza, and you're just wondering at what point will there be some type of intervention? At what point will it get so bad that the U.S. is forced to intervene, or countries in the Middle East, somebody does something, Iran starts. Do you see that happening with this invasion in Gaza? You think that the starvation would trigger it, but I mean,
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately, I don't know. I just don't hold out a whole lot of hope. You would hope it would have happened already. Um, it's with these things, yeah, let's see. On the one hand, there is this danger that I think I sometimes I see in myself and other people who are highly critical. That certainly fully condemn the Israeli actions in Gaza. It's just that you almost become used to it and you become numb to it. It's become a daily reality and you start to almost forget about it. And I just sometimes I have to pinch myself and say, hey, this nightmare is continuing. It's not getting any worse and it's just unacceptable. And so we do need to condemn it again and again and remind ourselves. But there is that danger that it's just like the world, so much of the world has just become used to it. Um, and it's gone on for a long time without any real moves against him. And you would hope at some point there would be a breaking point, but we just haven't seen it yet. We again, as we've pointed out, there has been more condemnation. There's the symbolic move of recognizing the state of Palestine. There was the announcement by Mertz of all people that shipments of arms to Israel would be suspended. This is that's all significant, but it's a long ways. Doesn't seem to be having any effect on Netanyahu and his people. I think maybe it starts to affect some of the more cosmopolitan members or of Israeli society, but all in all, it really hasn't changed. You look again at um, you look at the polls that are taken in Israel, and then like on the question of starvation, 80% of Israelis or Jewish Israelis just felt like there wasn't really an issue. There was nothing that concerned them there. The starvation of Palestinians was not a matter of concern to them.
yeah, it's true. There is a problem that it seems like there's a couple tactics that these players can make. They know that they can just change the news cycle. Some people are screaming at you like this is the most important thing in the world. I think a good point of case is actually the Epstein case. We saw that with Trump, and I was going on like nobody's going to let this go. People they're going to have to keep onto it. It's starting to just slip out of the news cycle. There's still people that are still on it, but it's just one of those things that no longer is front and center, which was just right there the whole time. And all of a sudden now they create some other story, get people, and they just know that their attention span's not long enough. They'll forget about it and then they'll continue. Or with the Gaza war, they realize the other strategy is like, even if it's something that is a longer process or whatever, people will just get numb to it. You just keep on doing it over and over, and people will scream and cry and holler for a long time, but eventually they just get used to it and they'll be like, this is the way things are. And they'll be like, wasn't it always crazy in that area? They're always fighting. They'll start to just go into that, slip into that mindset. I mean, but the only thing with Gaza though is just it just gets even worse. So it becomes harder to look away. It's like, okay, you bombed that hospital in the beginning. That was bad. Kind of forgot about that. You killed all those aid workers, the World Kitchen people, the Red Crescent. Each one of these things just horrible, horrible, and it all becomes distant memory. But then now we see starving kids. It just keeps on coming back. Like if we need to have some, I'm sure people are documenting this, and there's going to be a movie or something out that we'll see as in just just a lineage of all these just horrible, horrible war crimes committed, and we will look back, as a world, as a civilization, just be like, how did we let this happen? How did we let all of these things go again and again and again and again for years and years, and nobody did anything? It's really it's shameful. It's really shameful, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Somebody needs
Yeah.
to make that
I
move,
was,
and people need to see that, and they need to think about, like, what do we need to, what do we become? And but then, just part of me then also, like, I started the question originally talking about the Middle East is, what can Israel do at this point? I mean, obviously, I'm just like, I'm very pro-Palestinian. What Israel's doing is, in my mind, is clearly a genocide. It needs to stop. But then you just say, like, well, what can they do? If you were in charge of Israel, like, you can't. I feel like they can't even stop. Like, that's what I was. I'm kind of. I just don't. I didn't. They're screwed. What do they do? Like, if they stop now, you committed half a genocide. Okay, the whole world hates us. You set all of your neighbors on fire in Syria and Lebanon and in the West Bank. Like, everybody hates you. What can you do now? Like, what? Then I think maybe in their mind, and maybe the problem with the Israelis is that there isn't another option for them, and they've come to accept that. Like, well, I guess
yeah.
this was kind of the plan. I don't like how it's turning out because it's really messy. We're unpopular, but that's that. This is the only way forward now. We're in this deep. You can't stop now. They're screwed, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, part of the problem is this victim mentality. It's just like, we Jews are always the victims. And so when the criticism of Israel, grows and grows and becomes more and more widespread, and Israel becomes an international pariah, which is what it is now. You say, see, we're always the victims. We're used to this. And it allows you not to look too closely to what you're doing. Maybe they're criticizing you because of what you're doing, not because you're Jews. But it's easy. You can see this is sort of an easy escape for them. Rather than face the reality, it's just like, oh, it's anti-Semitism. I see that again. Even Haaretz has some wonderful articles and some great writers, but you see a lot of that kind of mentality there too. I was just, reading a couple of articles that reflected that mentality today. So, yeah, I think that unfortunately, for a lot of Jewish Israelis and their Jewish supporters around the world, it's something that maybe they're not quite happy with, but they already have the kind of the mental framework to accept that and to explain that. So the world hates us. Of course they did. They do. They're all anti-Semites. This is what always happens to the Jews, and they almost, feel like, oh yeah, this is the way things are, and it's almost like the way things are supposed to be. I think many of them think so. They can live with it. They're obviously not all Jewish Israelis are that way, and much less Jews outside of Israel. They can't, and who have actually really turned very strongly against Zionism, or at least partially against it. But within Israel, and again in a large fraction of the supporters around the world, this is a very comfortable kind of situation to be in. And it's even, people like Netanyahu are probably quite pleased with it, because they see it potentially as supporting the Zionist project. If you have Jews feeling unsafe or whatever, under attack, you get a certain percentage of them. I think in the end, he actually is miscalculating, because enough Jews, especially, ones with real options, are looking at Israel and saying, maybe this is not such a safe place. This is not such a good bet. But there are certain numbers who are real committed Zionists who just actually, renew their commitment to Israel under these circumstances.
This victim,
and we've seen, apparently we've seen some of that, like after October 7th, a certain number of Israelis came back to Israel, but it went both ways. You're getting a certain type. I think maybe, again, the more cosmopolitan are leaving Israel, but others are actually returning to support the Zionist project.
this victim mentality, is this an identity that was formed after the Holocaust, or was this something that was always part of a Jewish identity?
Yeah, I think it actually it precedes the Holocaust, but of course it was greatly, exacerbated by the Holocaust. No question about it. Right. You can understand it up to a point. But again, we're talking about how the world has changed, like for Europe since the 1990s, and a lot of people just haven't are still living in the 1990s, and they're basing their decisions on the way things were in the 1990s when we live in a completely new world right now. And the same thing you can say about Israel and the Jews. It's a completely different world from the world of, let's say, the 1930s. It's but it's I think you could say like what's happened since October 7th has been a wake up call. There are a certain number of Jews, especially younger Jews in places like the United States, who really have woken up and said, I'm having nothing to do with Zionism. It is something like redefined and it's broken the spell, and they've entered into the new, acknowledged the new reality. But there are a lot of people that are wedded to the old reality, and they find it, it was where they've always been, and it's where it was part of their identity, and they've actually kind of just renewed their commitment to it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the Zionism has really destroyed the fabric of the United States, and I'm I'm fascinated to see what the aftermath is going to be like, especially in this country with Christian Zionism. So much of U.S. identity, a lot of they like to say we're a Christian nation, but it's as largely a Zionist Christian nation. And I'm just wondering
Mm-hmm.
what that means for us moving forward and for Christianity in this country and
Yeah, right. I don't have answers to the questions, but there's going to be a big impact. Because again, these are not Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism has really worked its way into the thinking, the faith of a lot of people in this country, and it's not going to die an easy death. And I don't really know what the consequences are going to be. Just to give you an example, our good friend Lindsey Graham just the other day, I think it was yesterday, said that if we pull the plug on Israel, God will pull the plug on us. It was as a statement of Christian Zionism from our number one hawk.
right.
But there are a lot of people who actually think that way.
Yeah, I know there are a lot, but a lot of people, I think, are when they hear these statements, it damages. It's causing a fracture, I
Yeah,
think, within the sort of evangelical Christian community. I think there are a lot of people
yeah,
because they are decent people, and they're just like, wait, something
hmm
just doesn't feel right about this. I know I was always
right,
told that Israel's great, but I don't like what I'm seeing, and I think
right.
it's causing a real shift. So, well, anyways, let me go back to just my statement earlier, just saying that Israel is screwed. Do you agree that that's the case? That no matter what they do, even if they just stop now, they're screwed. I mean, if they or they continue with what they're doing, and they're screwed.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's again, like I said, the damage is permanent. It's not the world's not going to start loving Israel if they just stop right now. The damage is permanent. They're going to be a hated nation for a long, long time. Um, and even if they stop the war, it's just there's no way they're. Even if Netanyahu falls from power in a let's say a more let's say less apocalyptic, less extreme coalition comes to rule Israel, still Israel is by and large committed to it's not by and large, but it's overwhelmingly committed to ethnic cleansing and to this, to Zionism, which is really the expansion of Israel to the greater Israel project. It just might slow down, and more attention may be paid to providing lip service to you know you know to notions of human rights and so on and so forth. But the reality, I think, I don't think it's even possible in this case. But if let's say if we got a new government that was a little bit like the older Israeli governments that did pursue, supported the expansion of settler control within the West Bank, the you know the really inhumane policies towards Gaza that preceded October 7th, just treating Gaza as an open air concentration camp. If we went back to that government, um, it's just, I think there's too many people in the world whose eyes have been opened. They were able to fool people in the past because they moved slowly, because they used certain kinds of rhetoric. But I don't think they can do it anymore. I mean, even the old policies were cruel already, and people will see it around the world. And I think that's just not going to change. But I don't think that's even possible, just because Israeli society as a whole, even among so-called, broadly what you might call the left within Israel is supportive, has become radicalized too, does support genocide or ethnic cleansing. And things might slow down. At least, for example, he could be thrown out of power, and there could be a coalition government that actually does broker some kind of ceasefire and brings the hostages home and stops military operations for a while. But I think it's only going to be for a while, and at some point it's going to start up again. Maybe it just won't be quite so radical or quite so savage as what we're seeing now. But it's just, again, it's not going to. It's Israel will remain hated, and it will continue down the downward course that it's on now. Again, the younger generations in all these countries that still do support Israel, they're eventually going to come into power, and that's going to be the end. When Israel loses support from the U.S., that's going to be the end of Zionism, because Zionism cannot continue without U.S. support.
Is Netanyahu laying out a vision for his people? I mean, because it sounds like, when we always try to play out the logical conclusion, it's like, yeah, well, this all ends badly for Israel. The vision he's saying is that, yeah, this is just how it is. We're always hated. We're Jewish people. They're going to hate us no matter what. So we just got to do it. And then we'll have our great land, and everybody will hate us. But that's normal. That's the status quo. They're okay with that.
Fine.
Is that
Well,
his vision?
I think clearly he is. I mean, that's how else can he explain his policies? I mean, he looks to it's not just the U.S. Let's be honest. Of course, the main thing is the U.S. Without the U.S., again, no Zionism. I think it's that clear. But he feels like his support from the U.S. is rock solid, and it is at the moment. But I think, again, if you look at the long-term trends, that support is very much in doubt. But at the moment, probably with, in his lifetime, or at least like over the next few years, it is going to be rock solid. I think that's his calculation, and he's probably right about that.
You froze on me,
but
Dad.
then, if you look at some of the neighboring countries, like Turkey, or, even the governments of, Jordan and Egypt, and even of Saudi Arabia and so forth, rhetorically.
Hello?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay. Even in Saudi Arabia, that rhetorically they can actually be very harsh in their criticisms of Israel. But, behind the scenes, they really don't do anything to oppose Zionism. And, and leaders like Erdogan work together with him. And, Netanyahu looks at this. He has a government in power in Lebanon, that is compliant. And he has one in Syria that's compliant. He has in Jordan, Egypt, all around him, he's had his way. And so, he knows that a lot of the vast majority of people in these countries hate him and hate Israel. But as far as he's concerned, that doesn't matter, as the governments are on his side.
Hey, Dad, I'm losing you. You're going in and out.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, Dad, I think let's just end it here.
Okay,
if you
can you hear me now?
me.
Okay.
All right.
I'll
have
talk
a
to you
good
later.
rest of your day.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.